seen any elves?
Well, it's finally here. Project Tamriel's second playable map, Kingdom of Anvil, was released some time ago, providing us with our first look at Cyrodiil. For those who are new to the channel, about a year ago I made a Why Old Lore Skyrim is Best Skyrim, which surprisingly got a lot of attention, becoming my most viewed video at the time. It was about Skyrim Home of the Nord's release. And I think it only proved that there is a lot of interest for Morrowind related old lore content. So, after reviewing Skyrim Home of the Nords, it's time to do the same for the Kingdom of Anvil. And just to clear up a few things one more time, both Skyrim Home of the Nords, whose goal is recreating old lore Skyrim, and the Project Cyrodiil are simply two branches within the Project Tamriel. So in other words, Project Tamriel is an all-encompassing term for a number of fan-based modding teams whose end goal is basically creating entire Tamriel. In fact, even the entire planet Nirn. More about that at the end, but for now, I just wanted to make things more clear, as everything might sound a bit confusing to newcomers, since there are so many projects and provinces and whatnot. As for the Kingdom of Anvil, I'll keep it spoiler-free and rather short, as I truly believe that everyone deserves to experience this amazing content as fresh as possible. What Project Cyrodiil achieved here is nothing short of a miracle, on par with the Tamriel rebuild, meaning what's technically a mod doesn't really feel like a mod, but a natural extension of the vanilla game. And if you ask me, it all harkens back to that question many of us had while playing Morrowind for the first time all those years ago. What the rest of Tamriel is like during the Third Era.
I'm listening.
Well, Kingdom of Anvil is our door to Cyrodiil itself, the Dragon Empire, starry heart of Nirn. As the title suggests, map is covering the city of Anvil and its relatively small kingdom, covering the southwestern corner of Cyrodiil, including the nearby islands. Anvil is one of the 8 traditional kingdoms of Colovia, who collectively comprise the western portion of Cyrodiil. So, before we dive in and take a closer look, let's just briefly discuss the topic of old lore. I talked about it in my Skyrim Home of the Nords video, so I won't go much into detail again. In the simplest terms, the main goal is to recreate the continent of Tamriel, as it was described prior to Oblivion, in Morrowind, Redguard, and in the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire. So the general idea is to match the unique setting of Elder Scrolls 3 in every way possible. Old lore Tamriel looks and feels vastly different. It's much more mystical, dreamlike, I'd say more esoteric, strange. The emphasis is on the politics, diplomacy, complex culture, and rich traditions.
What makes this smell?
Elements that were reduced in the later Elder Scrolls games for the sake of simplicity. Starting with Oblivion, Bethesda made a major shift in focus. In Oblivion, and even more so in Skyrim, world revolves around the player, while before that, the emphasis was on the world itself. There's also a quite common misunderstanding that human races, especially Imperials, are more generic compared to alien and intriguing elven cultures. But the reality is that entire Tamriel was, in fact, strange and full of unique wonders. For example, Cyrodiil was a vast mystical jungle, filled with living dragons, small kingdoms, and 1,000 strange cults. And Skyrim was a primordial icy wasteland, inhabited by powerful voice-wielding users, and so on. So Project Tamriel is simply recreating this vision of Tamriel. With that said, Project Tamriel didn't just create a world completely cut from the main timeline and purely out of their own imagination. There are segments that carefully maintain continuity with the main timeline whenever it's possible. And much of the lore and world building draws inspiration not only from classic Elder Scrolls games and their concept art, but also from numerous out-of-game texts written by game developers. So without further ado, let's find out what makes old lore Cyrodiil so different and special. Well, for starters, I think that the first thing that most players will notice when they arrive in Anvil is the scale. Scale of everything. It might even seem a bit overwhelming at first. Not surprising, as Anvil is one of the largest cities of Cyrodiil, and also its largest port. Anvil is home to at least several hundred unique NPCs. Needless to say, there is much to do and see just in the city alone. Numerous taverns, shops, sewers that extend under the entire city, if you're into that. Guilds of all kinds, societies, clubs, trading companies, bathhouses, apartments. So it'll take some time getting to know your way around. My friendly advice is acquire a copy of A Guide to Anvil and simply walk around and talk to everyone. Talk is cheap, as they say. Fortunately, the city is separated into a few areas, such as the impoverished town of Little Arantia, the stunning garden quarter with the magnificent temple of Dibella, Marina, which is home to the majority of the guilds, and the enormous castle Goldstone, the seat of the kingdom's power. In my opinion, the best way to start exploring the map is by joining one of the major guilds and going from there. Fighters and Mages Guild are the most obvious choices and can be found near the main gate. But there are also other factions, including the very kingdom of Anvil. Now, speaking of scale, this version of Cyrodiil is bigger than the one in Oblivion. I can't say how much exactly, but it'll definitely be much more massive, with plenty of new settlements. And from what I understand, this is because it matches Morrowind's scale, which is apparently larger than the one in Oblivion and Skyrim. Again, we are talking about the scale. So if we look at the official Project Tamriel's map, Kingdom of Anvil occupies this rather small corner of Cyrodiil, yet in-game it feels huge. Landscape is handcrafted and detailed. There's a sense of freedom and raw wilderness while free roaming, without stumbling upon a new cave or a dungeon every 10 steps, like in some amusement park. Yet game world never feels boring. So it's a really well-crafted map with a scale that balances out the size and the content. As we all know, Cyrodiil was originally described as an endless jungle. When Oblivion came out, it suddenly turned into a temperate, European-looking landscape. And although I wasn't really bothered by it, I have to admit that Anvil's sun-drenched Mediterranean scenery with olives, palm trees, and golden grasslands does look great, offering a very dramatic experience. Everything looks sort of more ancient and mythical. The city itself is unmistakably going for that ancient Mediterranean aesthetic. Colorful elongated windows, white houses with aged walls revealing deep red bricks. And combined with the vivid street art, it does feel like walking through some ancient Roman city. Castle Goldstone is sort of a story for itself, as it's truly massive. And like any good castle, there are rumors of secret passages and whatnot, so it's definitely worth exploring. Now, going outside the city, much of the Strident Coast, as this southwestern region of Colombia is known, is predominantly a golden grassland. Savanna-like landscape is filled with exotic flora and populated by a number of common and bit uncommon fauna. Predatory creatures include Colombian bears and wolves, snakes and bats, but my favorite has to be the mighty Alfin, a large beast that luckily prefers hunting alone. Alfins are best described as a cross between a tiger and an eagle, so similar to griffins. I also love the incredibly goofy Strident Runner, a flightless bird that's kinda semi-hostile, meaning it won't turn hostile unless player decides to invade its territory. Golden Tanta is one of the peaceful animals, and I have to say, besides horses, probably my favorite creature in this region. They are incredibly cute. Anytime they disturb my sleep, I consider it a blessing. Besides the sea of yellow grass, there's a humid, swampy area on the banks of a Streed River, called the Dacic Marsh. It's found in the lower eastern portion of the map, bordering Valenwood. And I believe that this is only a little preview of the rest of Cyrodiil, which will be much more green, humid, and, well, covered in jungle. We might see some temperate zones further north into the Colovian highlands, including barren mountains. But the central and eastern Cyrodiil might be, like we said, covered in dense, vast jungles, rainforests, and countless lakes. In terms of settlements, City of Anvil might be fascinating in its size, number of services, and infrastructure, but the charming trading town of Brina Cross and several smaller villages add a ton of atmosphere and coziness. Brina Cross, for example, totally won me over, reminding me a lot of good old town of Caldera. And Salthard is a fine example of a remote estate owned by Colovian nobility. There is a lot of charm in the rural Colovia, with its many farms and orchards hidden between golden hills. And then let's not forget Karak, formerly known as Stirk, offering a genuine tropical island experience. Sand beaches, lost ruins, and numerous small islands to explore. Ruins play a big role in every Elder Scrolls game, and here they were given a lot of attention. My favorites were the ancient Ramen forts and Eyelid temple cities, with Colovian barrows, Cyrodiilic crypts, and numerous caves and mines, also having a lot to offer. Ramen forts are, for example, haunted by undead, oath-bound legionnaires, sworn to protect the forts even in afterlife. What caught my attention is how these Ramen forts resemble the ones seen in Skyrim, instead of standard present-day Imperial forts. But that could actually make sense, as Imperial forts in Skyrim date all the way back to the Ramen era. Hopefully I'm right about that, and if true, it's a really nice detail. On the other hand, Eyelid ruins offer a glimpse into a distant and mysterious past when these lands were ruled by enigmatic Heartland elves. I'm not gonna say much about them, but expect some pretty interesting things within these oppressive, dark hallways filled with magic. However, I will say that plundering these ruins is rewarding. Personally, I love collecting ancient items, like Raman-era military equipment, eyelid scrolls, or Nidic bronze. They may not be so usable or even pricey, but if you value local history, they are certainly priceless. Now let's briefly talk about politics, society, and culture. As already mentioned, one of the biggest changes is the emphasis on politics and diplomacy. I mean, Cyrodiil is the imperial province, and we should expect a highly complex socio-political situation. On the macro level, Cyrodiil is divided into the Colovian West and Nibenian East, and there are some pretty significant differences between these two dominant cultures, something that Oblivion sadly failed to portray in full capacity. Anvil is thus only one of 8 traditional kingdoms of Colovia, and is a joinable faction, which means that we may be able to join other kingdoms as well. Colovia is ruled by kings who, in turn, answer to the emperor. I honestly love this setting as it portrays Cyrodiil as a multi-layered and more fragmented, massive empire, built upon centuries of warfare and diplomacy. Instead of being a monolithic, one-dimensional culture, it also adds more scale, making Cyrodiil seem even bigger. For instance, I've rarely seen common citizens talking about the emperor, simply because they are too occupied with their own local politics, or, everyday life. Colovians even have their own aristocracy, Colo-Nordic nobility, descended from Nord mercenaries who aided in the Alessian rebellion and were given land on the western frontier as a reward, which explains for a Nordic aspect of a Colovian culture. Colovians are pragmatic, austere, and they prefer militarism and discipline over mercantilism. I should add that further down the line, Colovians themselves are comprised of several smaller ethnic groups, like Highlanders, Bretonics, Kawachi, and so on. What all this means gameplay-wise is that each Colovian kingdom will be a separate faction, with its own storyline, history, and tradition, adding its own local flavor, if you will. On the other hand, there are uniquely strange eastern elites ruling over the Nibene, including the Cyrodiil city. Not much is known about them so far, at least to me, but there are some interesting lore fragments out there. Nibenian East is ruled by so-called battle mage aristocracy, merchant nobility, and various religious cults, with the emperor above them, obviously. So compared to Colovians, Nibenians value mercantilism or trading, diplomacy, bureaucracy, sorcery, as well as some, let's say, more bizarre forms of religious worship. It definitely sounds interesting, and as much as I love Colovian lore and culture, I'm so eager to explore Eastern Cyrodiil. This, though, may be further down the line, as Project Tamriel seems to be focused on Colovia first.
Your friendship is a solace to me in these evil days of falsehoods and strife.
So for now, we can only focus on the local politics and events, which are far from boring. Kingdom of Anvil is going through a crisis since the king is missing. Also, pirates are raiding, and the necromancers are establishing a secret underground network, resulting in a high amount of undead throughout the Strident Coast. So yeah, plenty of local storylines to keep the player busy. I honestly love this approach, focusing on one region at a time and giving it so much attention and detail. And to finish up, in my opinion, the best thing about these projects is creating highly detailed, immersive, and rich worlds that don't revolve around the player. The very soul of Elder Scrolls universe, or franchise, or however you want to call it, is the adventure, exploration, and deep, unique lore. Again, I have nothing against Skyrim's power fantasy approach, but many gamers miss that classic era when Elder Scrolls used to be a bit more daring. One of the most frequent criticisms I have encountered, at least under my videos, is that these projects are not completed. And this was especially the case for Skyrim Home of the Nords, as the playable map covers only a half of the Reach hold, giving the impression that playable content is incomplete or too small. And I have to remind again that these maps operate on a larger scale. The current playable map of the Reach is not only bigger but more dense and content-rich than the one in Elder Scrolls V. And like I said, Kingdom of Anvil may look small on the overall map of Cyrodiil, but once you start playing it, you'll be surprised just how vast it is. Plus, this is Morrowind, a game requiring more focus, micromanagement, and attention to details, as well as having text-based dialogues. For instance, I'm still going through my initial Kingdom of Anvil playthrough, and after 20 plus hours, I'm still far from exploring the entire map and doing all the quests. In fact, at the time of recording, I haven't even started the main Kingdom of Anvil questline. And also, every map is designed to be self-contained as much as possible. Like I said, it's all about zooming in and giving the extra detail to all these local regions. And you know, mods like Ashfall that add survival elements, or Storm Rider ship, allowing the player to genuinely sail across the Abecean, greatly benefit from all these new lands and items, adding a ton of role-playing possibilities. And what's best, this is only the beginning. Morrowind itself might be my favorite game, but I truly believe that when combined with the Tamriel rebuild and the Project Tamriel, it becomes something even greater, more of an experience that is really impossible to find in any other game. No other game will ever be like Morrowind, simply because it's a product of its time. And what these amazing fan-based modding communities achieved is, well, giving Morrowind not only a second life, but a status of an endless game. Modding scene is more alive and dynamic than ever, with Tamriel Rebuilt and Project Tamriel going through sort of a renaissance. Both teams seem to be in full power mode, and we can expect a major release pretty much on a yearly basis. And I know, it may take a while until we have an entire continent of Tamriel under our feet, but it's the journey that matters. In fact, I believe that High Rock and Hammerfell are already in active development, although I don't know much beyond that. What's interesting is that there are plans to develop lands beyond Tamriel, from Yokuda in the west, Piandonea in the south, to the island of Esroniet in the far east, towards Akavir. And we also may even see Akavir or land on the moon. In other words, goal is to develop entire Nirn and possibly beyond. As for Project Cyrodiil, future updates will expand the map to the north, with the areas around the cities of Such, Kawach, and Sankrator. All in all, I always love to say that Morrowind's future is bright. So if you're playing on PC and already have Tamriel rebuilt, there's really no reason not to give Kingdom of Anvil a chance. All that is left to say is a big thanks to all the people behind these projects. People who invested their time and talent in creating some of the best Elder Scrolls content ever made. And just a reminder, Tamriel Rebuild's Grasping Fortune is just behind the corner, expected later this year. So I'll see you around. Thank you all for watching, and if you'd like to support me and my channel, join my channel membership or Patreon, or simply like and subscribe. And I'll see you soon.